Good morning. Thank you very much to all participants joining us online for this training session, and thank you also to our host institution today, the University of Belize, where participants are gathering for the on-site version of this webinar in its Regional Language Center in room 238 of its Belmopan campus. So thank you very much to all of you. Well, welcome to the first dedicated training in open government and open data for non-government stakeholders of the project Promoting an Open Government Ecosystem in Belize, implemented by the Trust for the Americas and the Department for Effective Public Management of the Organization of American States, with the support of the Embassy of the United States of America in Belize. My name is Mike Mora. I'm a specialist with the Department for Effective Public Management of the OAS, where I coordinate activities in different areas such as digital and open government, open data, among others. Today, we especially would like to thank their organizations, Omidyar Network and Somos Mas, represented here through our speakers of the day, who are going to talk to us in light of their experiences about what is open government, what is open data, why is it important, and how civil society organizations can get involved in the process to co-create better government services, among other things. The open government data session that we begin today are open to anyone from civil society. That for the purpose of this project, we will consider part of the open government ecosystem of Belize. That is civil society organizations, foundations, private sector, academia, and any other citizen interested in participating in these sessions. Our goal is to embrace, specialize, and develop skills in a dedicated group of stakeholders that can become agents for change, willing to support innovation in public management and public service delivery through open government. So I want to thank you again for your attendance and commitment today. Thank you for logging in. Thank you for those participants joining us at the University of Belize. Please don't miss any of the following sessions of this training program that we have organized. This session have been coordinated and will be displayed in a progressive way. We encourage you to revert the knowledge that you are about to receive today with colleagues and people in your communities and other foundations, other civil society organizations, other civil society actors. The video and materials related to this session will be shared and distributed to you afterwards. And that we'll do through our local project coordinator, Mr. Henry Wade, who is right now joining us from the University of Belize on the on-site session of this webinar. For questions about the project and how to engage, please contact our project coordinator in Belize, Mr. Henry Wade, who is also connected, as I mentioned. And you can find his contact information in the chat of this session. I'm sure we're going to put it there so you can reach out to him. So keep an eye on the chat tool of this session. At the end of this session, we will have time for questions and answers with the speakers. So please prepare your questions and send us those using the chat room precisely. After the presentation, we're going to engage on that Q&A. But please do send us your questions anytime throughout the presentations. Don't wait until the end. You can send your presentations. We're going to collect those, and Mr. Wade will moderate that session at the end. And so make sure you send your questions, anything you have. So that's it for the introduction. Without further ado, I would like to present the speakers of the day, Mr. Felipe Estefan and Mr. Nicolas Martin. As a matter of fact, I'm going to excuse Mr. Felipe Estefan. He's going to join us shortly, but he will be presenting, and I will have the pleasure to introduce him later on. Right now on the screen is Nicolas Martin from Colombia. We're very lucky to have them both, Nicolas and Felipe, in this session. They're renowned experts and bring practical and real-life experience in the pursuit of open government. So let me just get Nicolas first back online, and Nicolas is the co-founder of Somos Mas in Colombia and Europe. Somos Mas is an organization that works harnessing the collective intelligence in social ecosystems since 2003. Nicolas is an expert in social innovation and ICTs for citizen collaboration, and he is also a promoter and manager of several multi-stakeholder partnerships, including the promotion of Colombian civil society's engagement in the Open Government Partnership. Again, we are very glad to have you, Nicolas. So from this point on, the microphone is all yours, and I'm going to set your presentation there in a minute.
Great. Thank you, Mike, and thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. And what I want to share with you is the experience that we have in open government in Colombia, the experience coming from civil society. Then I'm going to make like a brief overview of our road, or as I put it in the presentation, the long road of Colombia towards open government, some experiences and experiences from civil society perspective, in the hope also that some of these examples can resonate with you, and in the hope also that for you it isn't so much a long road as it's been in Colombia. So there's a lot of experiences both in Colombia and in other countries that some newer countries to the open government experience, many times they learn from what other countries do, and they go and leapfrog what we have done. So then I'm very hopeful that this will be useful for you, and also will be, of course, very open to reflections and questions of the things that are of most relevance. So then the first thing that I'll do is talk a little bit about the notion of open government. Probably you've heard about this a little bit, but just to set the frame and see that we are on the same page. And a way that I like to understand the ways that people view or think about government, or citizens think about government, is like an old school way, like as if government was a vending machine where it gets your taxes in, and then it spits some public services out. And when things don't work, then people just try to jam in the machine and see how things can go out and what needs a fix, and so on. So in my perspective, this is a very narrow view, of course, of government, of something that is outside citizens, outside other sectors, and just get some taxes in and some services out. Another view, the view that I like, and that I like also seeing the name of these sessions, that is toward an open government ecosystem, is how to think about government more as an ecosystem as such, as something that it is, of course, responsible of providing some services and guaranteeing some fundamental rights, but its more structural responsibility is for others to act upon it. So it's more like a kind of coral reef that, as you have it there in Belize, more like a platform, and a platform for ecosystems to flourish, not to take things, but to flourish and to allow others to work on top of it. So that's the view that we have on open government, and the view that we have for the future of government in general, how to go to a stage where citizens, enterprises, academia, they work hand in hand, creating public value, not everyone on their own silos. So one way to go more in the theoretical perspective of this is think about open government in three pillars. Many times people are more knowledgeable of the pillar of transparency, and think that an open government is being open in terms of having their open their information available, and being transparent in the sense that citizens can view what is happening in government. Although this is, of course, very important, this is also a very narrow view of open government. Open government has another couple of pillars, that is participation. How can government include the participation of citizens and the other sectors, be it when it is consulting for public policy or it is designing public services. So how to get the view on how to hear the participation of citizens. This is another stage, and the other stage that is more profound is in terms of collaboration. In terms of collaboration is how we can work together, not only here, but how can we work with the different sectors? How can we work more horizontally, and how can we create public value among all of us? There are very interesting researches on how only transparency doesn't increases in itself the trust in government. As you know, currently in like worldwide, we are at an all-time low trust between citizens and government, and transparency is not enough. What we see is that when beyond transparency we get to participation and collaboration, that gets more results. Just to show some examples that you can find in the links. I think that there it is again. That you can find in the links that is shown here. In Open Government Partnership, of course, you can find all the information in Open Government, and in OGP Stories, you can see this. It's a relatively new website where they're starting to document some of the results of open government initiatives worldwide. So then you can find, for example, in Madrid and several places in Spain where local governments are working for building participatively legislative change with citizens. In Paraguay, things that have to do with participatory budgeting and specific projects. Estonia is a great example on participation and collaboration, also using innovation and technologies. This is just one of the examples that they have, the Assembling Citizen Voices, where they crowdsource, prioritize, and vote on important policy proposals. Georgia, that recently we had global summit of open government in Georgia just some weeks ago. They are starting very quickly, and this is an interesting case because these, as other countries, let's say Costa Rica and others, they are, although they are not very old on open government, they have learned a lot from other countries, and they are picking up the pace very, very quickly. So some notes on the Open Government Partnership. Probably some of you will know this is a multilateral initiative. It's currently in around 75 countries, created in 2011. It's intended to be between government and civil society, an association between both, where government is the only one that is active. It cannot participate fully. Governments have to sign an open government declaration around these kind of principles, and they have to commit to 2 years action plans that are action plans that have to be built, and they have to be implemented hand in hand with civil society. These commitments are then reviewed by an independent review mechanism, which is great for the countries that are here and for civil society, because it's a mechanism that allows us to get some, as well as the international support unit, to get some support and to get some international leverage when we need to, let's say, put a little bit of more pressure in the governments to stand by their commitments. Here it seems that the graphic just slipped a little bit, but some background on Colombia and the long road of Colombia. Colombia has like the advantage that it started some while ago on OGP, actually in 2011, when the OGP initiatives started worldwide. Colombia was one of the first countries to enter there, and the way that Colombia entered was more based on their advances, on our advances on e-government, which had a good thing because we were already working on this, but it had also some challenges that it was very based on things related with electronic government, on transparency, and probably not so much on participation. One interesting story is that initially, when Colombia government decided to enter OGP, it didn't include the participation of civil society, and actually it was the pressure of civil society organizations. Among those, Somos Mas. Somos Mas was part of the initial process of OGP in 2011, and then the government was partly was forced to work more hand in hand with civil society, and from them, civil society has had like a very good influence on what happens in open government. I'll jump into this probably more on the end of the presentation. We've also had very many advances. Colombia is a country that likes very much to do laws on pretty much everything. So we have a very good law on access to information, a good law on participation as a fundamental right. But like truth be told, although we have a good good legislation on this, there is still a lot to be done on these areas. Other interesting thing of Colombia is that we have the distinction between gobierno and estado, like government and state, I guess. That we view open government not only something about the executive branch, but also about the legislative branch, the judiciary, control organisms, at the subnational level. So we think in government in a more wider perspective than only the executive. And this is something that we've like stressed and put a lot of energy in the last years, that it is not only like central government that is involved in open government initiatives, but it's something that involves all branches of government and also of society. Some of the START commitments that we've had and we've had acknowledged in the Open Government Partnership. Sorry. So the Open Government Partnerships commitments, when there are some commitments that they find that are very transformative, they regard them as START commitments. We've had over 10, I think, in Colombia. Sorry, I'm going to get a little bit of water. So we've had plenty of this in Colombia. I want to show you some of them, and then to go in detail in a pair of exercises, and then to give you other resources. So to give you some examples of things that we've done, we've had the first. Sorry, it's in Spanish. The first one is called the Centro de Relevo. It's like it's a place where people with disabilities, sight disabilities or auditory disabilities, so they can contact a center. So if they want to contact the government or also some services, it could be by WhatsApp or it could be by call or whatever. They can communicate with this center that they will translate. They will translate to the person, be it in sign or other adaptations, so that people with disabilities can contact government services and many public services. It's this center, it operates 24 hours all days of the year. I think they have more than 2 million initiatives that they've supported on people that have disabilities, so that they can access to government easier. There's another one called Legal App that it has all the information of the justice sector, like all the information on procedures, all the information on frequent asked questions, all the information on how to do things that are related to justice, and to have some support, some easy support to get in contact and to know and to interact with the justice system. It is both online platform and a mobile application. Colombia has worked a lot in how to reduce reduce processes, so that people don't have to do them face to face, but that they can do them online. So this one, number 3 and number 8, they are very connected. Is how to you can access health services, you can create your enterprise, you can signed to Social Security, and a lot of things. You can do them now online, and then you can also, there are many like steps reduced on how to do these procedures. So there have been a very sustained efforts. Actually, there's like an area in the government that what does is identify how can they reduce procedures and how can they support some online support and online services so that people can do things much more easier. Other is transparency in the judiciary state, Consejo de Estado. The Consejo de Estado, it is like the oldest judiciary organ of the country. It was instaurated by Simón Bolívar like in 1817, and is the Supreme Tribunal on administrative issues. So what they do and what we're trying to do is that also the judiciary system, there's a lot of things to be done on transparency and participation on the judiciary system. Other, of course, is on peace and conflict. We've just, after all of you know, we've signed these peace agreements, and then a very important part of going beyond this is recognizing what has happened on the conflict. So a lot of the information, more than 240,000 documents, a lot of documentaries, and a lot of information that previously was confidential. Now it is easy to see. There are a lot of infographics and easy to access by both researchers and citizens, so that we have more in mind what has happened in the last 50 years of conflict. Another transparency initiative is on regalias. There are the money transfers from the central government to regions that have that have some mining activities. So here we have some online maps to see how are the investments on which areas, and people can see and can track where this money is going. Because the money that goes from the exploitation of natural resources, it's in Colombia, it's still one of the first lines of economy. So, and there it has had a lot of problems on transparency. So then this is one of the topics that has had a lot of work. Other sector, and is one of the sectors that I will show some detailed case, is on the health sector, because they are doing a very good job on seeing how to open the information and to work with people. And then I'll go to some in-depth examples, starting by open contracting. And this is a very important topic, because as you know, in many countries, probably including Colombia, the procurement processes on how the government contracts and does the hiring and contracting mechanisms, many times it's the first and most important source of corruption on the public contracting. So in Colombia, some years ago, it was created an entity called Colombia Compra Eficiente, Colombia buys efficiently, that has worked a lot on what they call a sistema electrónico para la contratación pública, an electronic system for public contracting. And it has had some stages. It had stages. It started many years ago with requiring that each and every one of the contracts that have to do with the public sector, that it has to be registered in something that they call the SECOP. And then a couple of years ago, they started a second phase of the SECOP, which not only has the registration of the contracts, but actually the process of applying for a contract with the government has to happen here. So here in the SECOP 2, the government announces which contracting initiative it has, and the organizations that are interested, they have to apply through the system, and makes all the process a lot much more transparent. And also on some other types of procurement of some more basic things, let's say let's say um, office supplies or so on, then the offerents can enter the system, and then they can put what are their prices, so that there is a more centralized and efficient way of buying goods and services by the government. This second part of SecOp 2, the one that is working in more like the transactional part, it started in 2015, with very little contracts, so like 28 contracts. Then currently, like as the end of last year, it managed more than 12,000, nearly 13,000 contracts. Also, many providers has been like exponentially being registered on these systems. Currently, around 30%, 30 or 40% of the contracts are being managed by this SecOp 2. Actually, by the end of the year, I think the goal is to manage 40% of all the contracts of the government, to manage it through this site. And next year, the goal will be around 60%, 60, 70%, so that in some, we hope, 2 or 3 years, all public contracting can be made through this system. This is very useful for many reasons. There are a lot of, for example, spin-offs from enterprises and even from people that work on open contracting that works on this information. All this information is in open data. You can access it both in the SecOp or in the open data portal of the country. So then, for instance, people that are interested in contracting with the government, there are some companies that they order this information and they present it so that people can do it easier, and they can also watch what is happening, and also as a control for civil society. Just as an example, we're working with another organization, and Transparency for Colombia is the branch of Transparency International Colombia, and others called Data Sketch, where we are getting some of this information and seeing what are some anomalies on public contracting. So then we can see that direct contracting is huge. Here we can see in the gray, we can see the information from SecOp 1, and here in red of SecOp 2. So a lot of the contracting is made directly without a process inviting more offerings. Actually, in local contracting, there are some regions, actually most of the regions are between 70 and 90% of the contracting in local municipalities is done by our processes that only one provider give their proposal. So here we see a lot of things that here we call them sastre pliegos, that are like tailor-made processes for specific contractors of the government. That, of course, this is one form of corruption, that government officials, they have in mind someone that they want to contract to, and then they tailor the process so that they can win. But now, when we have this available, now investigative journalists are using this information. We are using this information. We are seeing, for example, how many contracts they go even like up to 4 times the initial value of the contract, and this is a major source of corruption. Here, one experiment that we're doing, for example, is and we can do it because this information exists, is to cross the information of contracting and cross the information of funding of political campaigns. So just to just to give you some examples, we found that almost 600 of current elected officials in local and national government, in local and regional governments, excuse me, around 600 officials have been elected with contributions of contractors, of public contractors, which we have some laws that restrict restrict the funding to political candidates by public contractors, because then, well, then they put the person in office, and then what they expect is that the person in office, they can give them some of the contracts and can do these tailor-made contracts. So we've just mapped, and this is something that we did like around a week and a half ago. That there were around 8,000 donations to the last political campaigns by these contractors, and we found that there was 118,000 contracts from these elected officials to these contractors. So it is something that would be impossible to do if we didn't have this sort of information. So it is useful for companies, it's useful for the government to reduce costs, it's useful for civil society to see what's happening and to make a watch that many times like the responsibles of the government to fiscalize these kind of things, many times they don't go into this depth. Another example is in the health sector. So in the health sector, they like, it's a great example in Colombia on how to do a good process of opening up and working with different sectors. They have, and this is just a list of a few. If you go to this address, you can go on and see what are the information that they are releasing real time about the health sector. They do things, for example, this is the drug, the medication thermometer on prices. So here, what you do is that you write some medication, and it shows you the price at which, like the commercial price that it is managing. So they've done a lot in the health sector on regulation of prices, on seeing lobbying activities and making them transparent. They have worked a lot, and they have even like creating some difficulties with the pharmaceutical companies, because they in some countries, including Colombia, they just exaggerate a lot the cost of certain medications, because well, well, basically because they can do it. So the health sector has involved the citizens and different interest groups on how to make more transparent all the process. And this is a great example on how you can do an open government initiatives in a good like in a good way, involving different sectors. I'm going to pass very quickly, because also I'm seeing that I'm running out of time. I think I have like some 5 minutes left on other initiatives on open government and technologies. Here we can go to anticorrupcion.gov.co and look for a banner that is called Estado Abierto a un clic. That basically what it does, it shows some of the initiatives that we have on information systems that make things more transparent. So then the open data portal, the contracting portal, we also have opening budgeting, although we have some step backs on this in the last couple of years. You can see all the information that you require regarding to health. You have some accessibility initiatives. You have some initiatives where the local governments and different government agencies that need or want to improve their processes towards citizens, so they can have here a support from the central government so that they can do it in a more effective way. We have information, and this is rather new. For example, this Terridata information about the municipalities, like, so how is the municipality doing on healthcare, on social services, what are the current what is the information on rural activities, on the economy, on water systems, on vaccination. You can have information about whatever you want of the local governments and municipalities. So this is a great and is very recent. It's a great resource when you're doing, as we do in Somos Mas, we do a lot of participation with municipalities, to have this information, so that you can like work also on hard data. We also have, and on this we need a lot of more reinforcement to work at the local level on participatory processes and examples. So this is just some examples of some platforms where people can suggest things for the local government so that local government can implement them. However, it's very at the early stage because it's just until the consulting phase, and there is a problem that many times people don't, or the government officials don't necessarily take into account what citizens have to say. All of this has also spawned a lot of civil society initiatives. Let's say the Seamos, that is one that works with the City Council of Bogota, where we work hand in hand with city councils to see what are the top topics of the agenda to be discussed and do this in an open way. Um, there are a lot of tools to see to require information, like access to information, of public information, and based on that do some monitoring of corruption, do some monitoring of citizen movements, do some monitoring of the information around the cities and how are they achieving their plans. So with all of this, you could think that Colombia is like a good example of open government. And we do have some experiences, but there is a lot to do. And also thinking in the initial ideas of open government, not only being transparency and efficiency, but being of the participation and the collaboration with citizens. This is something that we gladly have been also the international community being more open to this. This, for example, is the independent review mechanism on Colombian level of participation on the implementation of the second plan of the Open Government Partnership. Well, although we had all these great initiatives, the initiatives were more at the consulting level in terms of participation. Many of the initiatives didn't involve, didn't collaborate, and didn't empower the citizens to work hand in hand. And this is something that other governments are currently doing more, thinking, even if there are more little governments and they are new to the topic of open government, there are other governments that are saying, hey, we need to work hand in hand with the citizen and with the civil society. It is not only of being more efficient, it is thinking about how to view, how to build public value. So that is a challenge that we have. We're stuck in transparency and efficiency. So in Colombia, although we have all these initiatives, government still has a view of citizens as receptors instead of participants. The new government, for the moment, has this view. When you look at the proposals for the government, that was probably you've seen that we have a new government since yesterday. But at the same time, we have some hopes for the future. So now, leaving behind the armed conflict past, hopefully leaving it behind, now fight against corruption is making its way to be number one public interest. Is the thing that media is paying more attention to, and this is a great opportunity, because if you have a deeper view of corruption, like a view of corruption it is not only viewed on how to get the bad guys, to put it in one way, but how you view corruption as a symptom of disdain and disgust for the public sphere, and how you view open government as an antidote or as a way of creating public value collaboratively, then there is a chance that this kind of perspective gets more ingrained in the government. Sorry. Currently, fortunately, we have just starting from today, some young and technocratic leaders in place. We hopefully they are a little bit more open to citizen participation and more open to more creative ways of fighting against corruption than only just increasing the jail years of corrupt people. Although, of course, this might be important, but to have like a more open and holistic approach. So that is our hope. and that is also like one of the things that we're pushing from civil society. So in Colombia, all of these advances, although government of course has a very important perspective, many of the things that I showed you, they were pushed from civil society, both internally and internationally. Actually, some of the things that I've shown you were brought by international cooperation resources that civil society brought. Even the people that worked on open government, they could work because they had international cooperation resources that was pushed from civil society. So if it wasn't for the participation of civil society, probably many of these things wouldn't have seen the light. Only just in a couple of cases, civil society was involved in the process proactively by the government. Let's say the contracting initiative and the health initiatives. These are a couple of cases where the minister was involved, was interested from the start in how to work with citizens. But for the rest, it has been a lot of both support and pressure from civil society organization on how to get government support. So, well, that's some ideas that I wanted to share you. Of course, I'm very eager to hear your questions and hear your also ideas, because as I was sharing, there is still a lot of things to do in Colombia. We've been stuck in the transparency and efficiency part, and we have to start to work more in the collaboration and participation between government and different sectors.
Thank you very much, Nicolas, for this great presentation. It is a pleasure. Very much, Nicolas, for this great presentation. It is a pleasure hearing from you, coming from civil society organization working on these issues, hearing the examples. It's a great insight for the public that we have here and for the public who's attending right now our on-site version of this webinar at University of Belize. So thank you to all the participants. Thank you to the participants who we don't see on this chat but are sitting down at University of Belize, listening and watching this webinar. Thank you all. As insightful it is, then it inspired different comments and questions in the chat. Nicolas, I invite you to look at those in preparation for the Q&A. And feel free to respond anything that you can find there on the chat as well, as we move on to the next presentation. And again, at the end of the presentations, we have a Q&A that will be moderated by our local project coordinator, Mr. Henry Wade, who's in the University of Belize right now. So thanks again. I'm gonna just ask Felipe Estefan to turn his camera on, and that way I get to introduce him. Nicolas, thank you very much. It's a pleasure. Nicolas is also here in. Felipe is also here in Washington D.C. and I will introduce him and move on to the presentation. In that way, we make a better use of our time. Thank you. We're very lucky to have you here, Felipe, participating. Another renowned global expert on open government, and among other of the subjects that he works on in a daily basis. So Felipe Estefan is the Director of Investments at Omidyar Network, where he structures and manages investments in Latin America as part of Omidyar Network's governance and citizen engagement initiative. He leads the firm's efforts to advance civic technology, independent media, open data, and fiscal governance in the region. In the context of his role, Felipe is a member of the Board of Directors of INCO and Nosas Ciudades, an observer on the board of Collab.re, and a member of the board of advisors of Chequeando. Before joining Omidyar Network, Felipe was the open government strategist at the World Bank, advocating for and advancing efforts to make governments more open and to foster collaboration between state and non-state actors. He was also a founding team member of the Open Contracting Partnership, where he coordinated efforts to increase transparency in public contracting processes around the world. We heard some of that in Nicolas' presentation. Prior to the World Bank, Felipe was a planning producer at CNN's Washington, D.C. bureau and was part of the permanent mission of Colombia to the United Nations in Switzerland. So he's got quite a background and more actively working in these issues that we're speaking about today here. So we're lucky to have you, Felipe. I'm going to put your presentation on and feel free to open your mic and begin. Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction, and thanks to all of you for your time. A special hello to all of you, and good morning if you're joining us from Belize. My name is Felipe Estefan, and as Mike was saying, I've been involved in the field of open government for too long of a time. I am as much of a veteran of the field of open government as you can get, in that I've been in the trenches, in the good times and the bad times, and I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, and I'm happy to be here to share some lessons. And I just wanted to build upon the presentation that Nicolas had given. And like Nicolas, I'm also Colombian, even though I'll speak to examples beyond Colombia. And it's because I think as you hear Nicolas speak, you realize that a lot of progress, like he was saying, has been made in Colombia, but a lot of work remains to be done. And I'm sure that for many of you who are with us today, you're wondering whether this is possible and what it takes to do it, and whether we can do it and whether we should do it. And I hope that what you take away from my presentation is very much so the idea that open government is something that we can do, that we should do, and that we actually can do in an effective and sustainable way. And so I'm hoping that some of my remarks will address that. And of course, happy to take your questions to the chat, both as they come in the presentation and then following the presentation in the Q&A period. So I know many of you may have arrived to this presentation wondering, what is open government and why are we talking about this? And I want to start answering that question with a somewhat controversial proposition, and is that today we are in a time unlike any other in the history of society. And why do I say that we're in a time unlike any other? It's because today we have more tools which are more sophisticated in the hands of more people to exchange more information more quickly than ever before in history. And to someone like me, that means that the fundamentals of how our society operates are transforming. Everything is different, and we can leverage the opportunity that these tools and their increasingly pervasive reach, that the opportunity that provides to be able to positively transform a number of things. And one of those is very much the relationship between citizens and their government. And so the first thing that I want to share with you is that openness is very much a future that is within the realm of possibility. And part of the reason that it's within the realm of possibility is because, quite frankly, we don't really have a better choice than to go with openness. And that's what I mean by this. The current relationship between government and citizens is completely broken. I know you've probably have heard way too much about Colombia already in today's session, but as a Colombian, I feel compelled to show you this image. This is from my hometown of Bogota, where people like Nicolas and Mike know very well that we have a terrible pothole problem. And it gets to the point that sometimes as jokes, television programs go in with citizens and start measuring the size of potholes. And it isn't out of lack of investment towards road infrastructure, but it's purely because issues of mismanagement and corruption have made it So that in a country like Colombia, in a city like Bogota, our roads sometimes look like this. Or the lines to access a service look like this. And so I wonder if today we live in an era in which through cell phones, we know exactly when an Uber or a Lyft car can pick us up, or how much time it will take for a delivery pizza to come to our homes. Why is it that to access public services, we're still having to do incredibly long lines to access very unclear information, sometimes unsuccessfully so, without interfacing in an effective way with our government? The reality of it is that the relationship between citizens and government as it currently stands around the world is largely broken. The crisis of trust and representation that we see today is very much based on the reality that citizens have when they interact with their government. The fact that they don't know how to submit a complaint to a government, or how to report that they have a problem, or to send a good idea for a solution that they think their government should implement. And if they do know where to send it, oftentimes the government doesn't even properly respond or address the needs of citizens. It's become almost to the point that in many places in Latin America and the Caribbean, we've come into a mentality where we blame everything on government. So the roads are bad, we blame it on government. The health is bad, we blame it on government. The lines are long, we blame it on government. And oftentimes government is at fault for those things. But it gets to a point that we blame so much on these amorphous concepts of government that we actually are allowed to not engage in a solution, because that mentality and that narrative that we've created about government solely being bad makes it so that we can't engage constructively with government, and that citizens feel like doing things such as voting or engaging in other civic spaces is not necessary or is not worth their time, because they don't see a result out of that engagement. And what we need to start transforming is to say that things can be better, and that they should be better, and that we're part of the solution to make them better. But the problems with government, as we continue talking about some of those problems before we move on to solutions, don't only have to do with mismanagement and inefficiency. They don't only have to do with potholes and long lines. They also have to do with corruption. And so this image is from Brazil, where, as you've seen in cases like Lava Jato and Odebrecht, the impact of corruption has been such that it has made it so that people go out on the streets to protest for a more transparent government. People want to know what their government is doing. They feel like they deserve to do so. And part of the reason that they feel that they deserve to do so is not only because the government ought to serve the people, but it is also because when the government hasn't been transparent about what it does and how it spends its resources, it has led actually to very bad problems. And so we see hospitals that don't have medicine, we see schools where kids don't have textbooks, we see bridges that were never completed, and the money was disbursed. It appears as if it was disbursed. As citizens, we're paying taxes, and we expect to see results for those taxes. But not often the resources that we provided our governments are spent responsibly and efficiently and transparently, and very many times we actually don't even know or have a way to monitor whether those resources have been misspent or stolen. And so if we understand that that is what's happening in the current relationship between citizens and government, rather than a choice, open government truly is an imperative. This isn't a nice thing to do. This is the very thing that we should be doing. And the reason that we should be doing it is because it will make it so that government is actually able to manage things better, is able to spend resources more efficiently, is able to respond as it's legally mandated to do to other branches of government and to citizens, so that private sector has a level playing field in which it can operate, so that it can predict the environment within which it's making investments, so that citizens are empowered with the information necessary to be able to understand what is happening with their government and to hold their government to account, so that media can better inform those citizens as they participate in voting, and so that it can conduct, rightfully so, investigations necessary to uncover mismanagement and corruption. So this is an imperative. It's the future of how our government should be working. And you could say to me, that sounds nice, but are there examples of how that actually is taking place? And what happens in the cases in which it is civil society or citizens, the ones who are having to take the protagonist role in driving that change? And Nicolas's presentation already gave you a lot of great examples of how that's beginning to happen, and how that's happening elsewhere. And I wanted to complement some of those examples with additional examples that give you a sense of how this is being done. But before I do so, I wanted to tell you a little bit more about where I work and the types of initiatives that we support, because those are the very initiatives that I'll be using in these examples. So Omidyar Network is a philanthropic investment firm. And what we mean by that is that we are both a philanthropy that can operate as a foundation that provides grants to organizations working towards social impact. And we're also an impact investing firm that can support and provide investment capital to startups and those who from the private sector are also working in the pursuit of social impact. And Omidyar Network, which has been operating for the past 10 years and take its name and received its financing thanks to the generosity of Pierre Omidyar, who co-founded eBay, has made it one of its priorities to support the governance and citizen engagement initiatives. And that governance and citizen engagement initiative, in which we support open government efforts, is the one for which I'm the director for investment in Latin America and the Caribbean. And so I want to show you some of the examples of what we've supported that give you a sense of how this vision of open government can be realized in the pursuit of better outcomes. So Mike was mentioning in my introduction that we work with an organization in Brazil called Gnosis. Gnosis is an organization that works at city level to use a combination of offline tools and online tools to mobilize citizens and to create coalitions of civil society organizations that can push government to respond to citizens' true needs. And they've done it in a number of different ways, but I want to give you one example of work that they've done in the first city where they started working, which was Rio de Janeiro. The woman that you see on your screens, for those of you who are being able to follow the visuals of the presentation, is a woman called Jovita Belfort. And Jovita is the mother of a daughter, Priscilla, whom you see on her t-shirt, who disappeared in 2004. Sadly, Priscilla's case is far too common in Brazil, where we see the largest number of disappearances anywhere in the world. Nominally, Brazil is also the country anywhere in the world with the most assassinations. That even includes war zones. The problem is that government hasn't always been properly set up to be able to respond to these cases. And so when Jovita went to her police department in Rio de Janeiro to ask them to investigate the disappearance of her daughter, she found that the government didn't really have a bureau set up to investigate those cases, and instead decided to just tag the case as a homicide and move on. Now, for those of you who are listening to this presentation and you may have a son or a daughter, I want you to think of what you would do if they disappeared and when you went to your government to ask for help, your government just moved on. That is what happened in the case of Jovita. She found that her government was not positioned in a way that she could help her. So she started working with Gnosis, this organization in Brazil that mobilizes citizens, which I was telling you about, to be able to create a campaign so that the police department would create a bureau specifically devoted to cases just like her daughter's, cases of disappearances. And so she brought together a number of other mothers who had followed the same case. She was able to mobilize and send emails through a digital tool to 15,000 other people who joined her cause. And through the combination of that offline mobilization with the mothers and the online scaling that the digital tools provided, she was able to get enough support and enough attention so that the police would actually open a bureau for the cases of the disappeared. That bureau, in its first year of operation, was able to resolve 83% of the cases that it received. So it gives you a good example of a moment in which the relationship between citizens and government was broken, in which citizens drove a solution that they proposed to the government, when government decided to listen to that solution and implement it, and where actually now there's much better results for government and citizens as a result of that collaboration. And that's one example of how Gnosis has leveraged the potential of open government in their work in Brazil. I want to talk to you about another example that we also support, which is a platform called Colab. Colab is a civic technology platform that governments can implement to be able to seek feedback from their citizens. And so what the platform allows them to do, and this is very much in line with some of the examples that you were hearing Nicolas describe, is actually, it works in a way, if any of you have, for example, Instagram, the interface looks very much like Instagram. You can see it from the image that's on your screen. It basically allows you, if you're walking around and you see a problem, for example, a light that is not working, a car that is illegally parked, a pothole that hasn't been filled out, any problem with signage or any problem at all at the city level, you're able to take a picture just like you would in Instagram and upload it to a platform that immediately tags that picture to the right person in government for government to respond. It then allows members of government to be able to follow up on the issue and to tell citizens through the same platform to which citizens reported what happened with that issue. So if today we live in a world in which Facebook can send us notifications and Instagram can send us notifications, why isn't that we couldn't then find out when government has responded to an issue that we've reported? And why isn't that we can't help report the issues that our city sees and the ones that we have to face on our everyday lives? And that is what this platform seeks to do. I wanna move from Brazil to Mexico to give you an example of work that we support the INCO, the Mexican Institute for Competitiveness, to do in Mexico. And is that, as many of you know, Mexico has been a country in which the relationship between citizens and government has not always been the best. There's been a lot of mistrust, there's been a lot of corruption, there's significant amounts of violence. And INCO has been one of the civil society organizations in Mexico that have been trying to figure out how they can best address some of those issues. And I want to give you the example of something called 3 out of 3, or in Spanish, 3 de 3. What INCO and others in civil society realized when they looked at Mexico is that a lot of corruption in Mexico came from the fact that those seeking office, candidates for office and elected officials, were actually not disclosing their information. There was no tax disclosure, there was no asset declarations, there was no conflict of interest declarations, and those weren't mandated by the law. In Mexico, to this day, you can run for office and never produce your tax returns. There's nothing that mandates you from doing so, which means that it is very hard for civil society organizations to see if, for example, a member of the legislature is voting for a project that directly benefits his commercial interests. There's no way to do that because candidates are not mandated to publish that information. Well, INCO decided to create a coalition of civil society organizations that would push for that norm to be changed. And when they realized that it was very hard to go through elected officials to enact a norm that would make it so that they had greater reporting requirements, they decided to turn to the citizenry. And so they created an online campaign called, you see some of the hashtags that they use on the image on your screen, with 3 out of 3, and 3 out of 3 is the 3 declarations that they wanted candidates to publish: the asset declaration, the tax declaration, and the conflict of interest declaration. And they went out and started an online mobilization campaign that then moved to the streets. And they were able to get 625,000 signatures from citizens, which then they physically rolled into Congress to do a press conference and to show that people in Mexico were calling for their candidates and their elected officials to give them more information about them. Even though they failed in turning this into law, the public mobilization campaign was of such high level that actually when candidates run for office in the Mexican election, which happened on July 1st, every single presidential candidate actually published their 3 declarations, even though they weren't legally mandated to do so, just because the pressure from civil society and citizens demanded for them to do so. And so it gives you a good example of how citizen-driven campaigns can push government to be more open, even in the cases where it might not necessarily want to do so right away. I want to give you another example from the work that IMCO has done, and thanks to Mike, who in the chat room, for those of you who are in the chat room, is sharing some of the links of the organizations that I'm telling you about. But IMCO also has a platform around education where they're doing open government work in the education sector. And that platform, which you see on screen, is called Mejora tu Escuela, or Improve Your School in English. And that platform first was created as a platform that would allow parents to better understand information about the public schools that their kids were attending. Nonetheless, and I see some comments in the platform that talk about the need for better information and access to information. And that is, you're totally right. For the people on the chat room who are talking about the importance of having more information, you're exactly right. And this example of Mejora tu Escuela is a good example to illustrate that. What the folks at IMCO who are implementing the Mejora tu Escuela project realized is that there wasn't good enough information about schools, that information wasn't really public. And that when you're dealing with the education sector, actually it isn't just about education. Because the classrooms, for example, the construction of the classrooms may have to do with the Ministry or the Secretary of Infrastructure. Textbooks and teachers have to do with the Education Ministry. But for example, protocols around hate speech may have to do with the school superintendent. So it is very hard for citizens to be able to navigate all of the different structures of government that would then impact the experience that their kids are having in a public school. And Mejora tu Escuela tried to improve that. So it did a couple of things. The first one is that it created a reports platform so that parents could report issues with their kids' school. And by allowing them to select the type of issue that they were reporting, the platform immediately sent the issue to the right part of government for government to respond. Now, if the official in charge of that response didn't respond in a certain number of time, the platform would automatically send him or her a reminder to do so. A failure to eventually respond after a number of weeks would make it so that those emails would immediately start going to that person's supervisor until a response was given to the citizen who submitted the report. So that is the first thing that Mejora tu Escuela did. But then they decided to go one step further, and this is where it connects to all your questions about access to information. They realized that there wasn't enough information out there about the budgets of the schools. How many teachers were in each school? How much money were they getting paid? How much money was being devoted to textbooks in the school? So they decided to move one step further and try to scrape that information, find that information that was mostly in pieces of paper and PDFs, and start cleaning it up and putting it into an open data database. When they did that, something very interesting happened, and is that they realized that there were a number of teachers that were getting salaries from the government, all of whom had mysteriously been born on December 12th of 1912. 12 of 12. Now, there could be teachers that are 106 years old, but there can't be that many of them. And not all of them could have been born on the exact same date. So by just simply taking all of the information that was in pieces of paper and in offline databases and putting them into a database, they realized very quickly that there were things that didn't seem right, and that there were actually a lot of fake teachers that were receiving salaries from the government, and that money from the education that should be going to students actually having good teachers was being stolen. They reported that, which led the Ministry of Education to do a massive reform on their education payroll. Now, Mejora Tu Escuela has done one more thing which is worth telling you about. So, as some of you may have heard, earlier this year, Mexico suffered some terrible earthquakes. Many of those earthquakes actually led to some very significant damage in public schools all around the country. So Mejora Tu Escuela, having this platform where they had already gathered so much information around the schools, decided to then create a map where they had geolocalized a bunch of schools, and then to work with the communities in the schools to get a sense of how much damage had actually occurred in each of those schools. Once they had the citizens reporting on the damage in the public schools in their areas, they overlaid it or juxtaposed it over the budget data of how much money was going for reconstruction efforts. And they realized very quickly that actually the money that was going to schools for reconstruction efforts was not going to the schools that most needed it. And that the decision for where that money was going was actually had very little to do with who needed it the most, and had a lot to do with how schools and different members of Congress had struck deals to make sure that that money was diverted to their districts. They've been able to report that, which is now making it so that more of that reconstruction funding is actually going to the schools that really need it and that suffer the most. So it gives you another good example of the kinds of results that you can achieve through open government. I'm mindful of time, so I'm going to very quickly skip this example and ideas Rio, but I do want to tell you a little bit about ALTEC. And ALTEC is a civic technology fund that has been created for Latin America and the Caribbean that has been supporting projects with Omidyar Network funding. It's been supporting the incubation of civic technology projects all across Latin America. And you see in this map the generation of projects that was funded last year. We received about 600 applications from across Latin America and the Caribbean for those projects. We've now selected a new round of projects. There will be even more projects being selected soon. But the reason that I'm bringing this up is because I want to share with you very quickly some of the things that civil society organizations in these countries have done. And so, for example, in Argentina, you see at the bottom of the screen, there's a project called Caminos de la Villa, which was implemented by two civil society organizations. One, a technology-based organization, and another one, policy-based organization that realized that in the suburbs of Argentina, there were villas or settlements, or what in Brazil we would call favelas, or in Colombia we would call comunas, which were these sort of poorer neighborhoods where settlements had happened, and that government was doing a very poor job at bringing services to those neighborhoods. And part of the reason was because government didn't even have maps for those neighborhoods. So if someone needed an ambulance and they lived in one of the settlements, the ambulance didn't even know how to navigate to get to that person. And so these civil society organizations in Argentina decided to work with the communities to map out their neighborhoods in a way that it would provide information to government to better provide access to things like ambulances, water, and electricity, and they've been able to do that through that platform. I wanna share with you briefly about another thing we've supported in Uruguay, which is called A Tu Servicio. And A Tu Servicio tried to bring open government to the health sector in Uruguay. And what they did with that was to try to map all of the health providing centers around Uruguay, because as many of you could relate, and I certainly, as I can personally relate, sometimes it is really hard to access healthcare services that government provides. You don't know where the health centers are. You don't know what services they provide. It might be some services in one, different set of services in another. You don't really know how long you will have to wait for the service. You show up and you could be in line for hours and hours on end. And what a civil society organization in Uruguay realized is that there was no reason why this should be this bad. That really, if you work with government and use technology, you could map and put in a platform online exactly where every health center was, exactly what service it provided, and you could even create an interface for citizens to be able to request appointments ahead of time for those services in a way that they could just show up when it was time for their appointment without having to wait long in line. And they've been able to roll out that platform, and that platform has been so successful that even though Uruguay has about 3 million people total population, that platform has been used over 2 million times. And it's another good example of where civil society and government have worked together to make the experience of citizens better by realizing the vision of open government. And like those, there are many, many more examples. And I think what I want to leave you with as I come to a close is that open government is something that you definitely can do. It is something that civil society can not only help drive, but for which it needs to help drive in order to make sure that the opportunities are leveraged appropriately. Openness is not simply a far-fetched dream. It is a reality that you can make happen if you're involved in doing so. And so truly what we've seen from my experience working in about 40 countries around the world on issues of open government is that openness is the path to a more prosperous and fair society, and that it is incumbent upon all of us to make sure that that dream becomes a reality. So thank you very much for your attention, and very much look forward to your questions both in the chat or on Twitter. You see my handles up on the screen if you'd like to continue engaging with me beyond the Q&A portion. But I'll pass it back on to you, Mike, so that you help moderate us on that Q&A.
Thank you very much. Felipe, for this presentation. Omidyar Network is a key player of the global open government ecosystem. Indeed, he's got practical experience. Thank you for sharing that experience. Just for the benefit of the doubt for the public, online and sitting at University of Belize, Felipe is a true champion of open government around the world. So we're very glad to have him here sharing that in his experience. I will ask Nicolas to please turn your camera on. We're going to begin the Q&A session. I do have myself questions for both of you. I will like to refrain from starting with my questions because I know there is interest in questions already by the participants for what I've seen on the chat. So I will just refrain from doing that. If we have time, I'll just check on those questions that I have. But thank you very much to both. I'm going to ask also Henry Wade, who is in University of Belize right now, to join us. You're going to moderate this Q&A, and you have been collecting the different comments and questions there on the chat. So as a local project coordinator, Mr. Henry will be moderating. You can open your mic, Henry, right now, and I'm going to ask Nicolas and Felipe to remember to keep your microphones mute, so we avoid any echoes and weird audio problems there as we always speak. So the microphone is
Hi, good morning, guys. Good morning, Mike, Nicolas, Felipe. Good morning, all participants. Can you hear me okay, Mike? Can you hear me okay, guys? Thumbs up? Perfect. Yes, so we have a few walk-in participants here at the University of Belize. Inclement weather, I believe, held back a majority of them, but we have a nice turnout online. So I want to thank Nicolas and Felipe in particular for connecting with us. We're here in Belize, guys, and this has been a wonderful session. Great presentations from both ends. To jump in the questions immediately, And just as a little bit of housekeeping, Mike, perhaps further towards the end, maybe we can review quickly the scope of the project, etc., for those of the participants who are a little bit unfamiliar. I note some of the comments included questions on the role of the OAS and our government partners here in Belize. So maybe we could leave that a little bit towards the end where we're closing. But to jump in the questions, firstly, we have Miss Suzanne Fuller, and I believe this was when Nicolas was presenting. So we want to direct this to you, Nicolas. She was asking, did Colombia fiscalize their tax reporting? So this was during that presentation when you were sharing some of the examples on open government in Colombia.
Great, great. On transparency, on tax, budgeting, and spending, there's been a lot done. There is one of the commitments currently is to match all this information, because currently we have very general information about budgeting and spending, and we don't have very well pinpointed how they get matched together. So this is something that hopefully will be done in the following months to have a better control of how tax income and how budgeting and spending get come together, and to see it more like in a local how it gets spent in the locally, because currently although there are very many initiatives to visualize it, it is still the information that we have is still on a very general level. But I'm not sure if this is the answer of you, or there is something more specific that you would like to know.
If that answers the question, Suzanne, please let us know in the chat box. And I guess we can proceed to the second one while we wait for Susan's feedback. Again, this one was during Nicolas's presentation, and this is from Lee McCollin, and he notes, Nicolas, I see a feeling of helplessness as the major impediment to fighting corruption. How have you approached the quote-unquote inspiration of civil society and the wider public to actually feel that they can influence the government, who are often the wealthy and the powerful elite? And I'd also want to maybe share that to Felipe for perhaps his feedback as well. Nicolas, go ahead.
Great. On this, I will support on Felipe's presentation, and I'll go back to the idea that partly corruption is a symptom of a feeling of degradation of public value. So then when people don't feel that public value, like the public sphere, be it roads, be it in the health sector or whatever, if they don't feel that it has value, then there is a tendency to regard it with disdain. And here is where I connect that it has not only to do with transparency, it has to do with participation and collaboration. If people feel that they have a role in building together with government, even if there are ideological differences, that you find ways to build together with government, and that public value is something that regards everyone, not only government, but everyone. I think this is what makes open government so powerful, that it brings on ways on how citizens can work with the government, even having disagreements. Like when you work on OGP, and let's say last year that there was a meeting on Argentina, civil society organizations work very hand in hand with government, but this doesn't avoid them to using these these platforms and these conferences to tell what is wrong about the government in terms of transparency and corruption, even if they work together. So I feel that the big challenge is how to work collaboratively, even if you have some distance and some differences, and you have even some tough situations that you don't agree with the government. You can build even if you are in disagreement.
Thank you, Nicolas. Can we also hear your comments on that, Felipe?
Sure. Can you hear me there? Yes.
Yeah, yes, we're hearing you loud and clear.
Great. Thanks for that question. I completely agree with Nicolas. I think one thing that I wanted to add to his answer is that sometimes we think about government. We sometimes talk about government almost as if it was a monolith. It's like the thing that is out there and it's the government. And the reality of it is that a more nuanced approach to engaging government is probably useful because in government there is always reformers. Um, just like in anywhere else, you will always find people who don't want to work with you and people who do want to work with you. And I think it's about identifying who are those people that have come into government out of a true calling for public service, who want to do better, who want to figure out how to implement better solutions, who want help and support and technical advice, and being able to engage them. And so if you're able to find those entry points, I think it makes the conversation easier than when we simply say, well, the government doesn't want to do X, or the powers that be don't want to engage in Y. And so I just first wanted to say that. But in terms of engaging citizens as a whole, which I think is sort of the central nature of the question, I think we have to continue promoting to citizens that the exercise of citizenship is not only a responsibility, but it's a right that we all must take seriously, and that it's a right that transcends elections. Even in representative democracies, it isn't enough and it isn't sufficient for citizens to just say, well, I'm just going to elect whomever is the least bad out of all these people and then just complain about them not doing good things and have that be the extent of engaging with government. And I think what we've seen around the world is that even in cases in which there's governments that are very close, and even in cases where there are sort of powerful government entities that want to fight against openness, overall, if you truly mobilize citizens in a smart way, combining online mobilization platforms and offline channels for engagement, the power of that mobilization eventually pushes so that government goes one step further than it had done before. And I think one thing that's important to think about when we think about open government is that we will never reach a full openness. There's no moment in which the journey towards openness ends. But every little step that we take is one step that it is harder for government to then retract. And so every step that we take, every little win that you get, you can then build upon that to get a new win. And so it's a little bit like the 3 out of 3 example that I was giving you earlier. The people running for office in Mexico have no intention of declaring their assets or their taxes. But so many citizens mobilized and continue to mobilize in the context of the campaign that they felt like they needed to, that it was an expectation, even if it wasn't a legally mandated expectation. And then it changes the norm, because once you've done it once, how is it that you're then going to have a follow-up election where the candidates don't do that? It sets a precedent, and then you can build upon that precedent. But I think Susan has a couple of follow-up questions that I'm seeing in the chat, and so if it's okay with you, Henry, I'll just go ahead and answer those since I have the mic. Is that okay?
Go right ahead, Felipe. Go right ahead.
Great. So I think Susan was asking about tax fiscalization, which Nicolas and Mike and others can add more, and I know Mike is adding some resources in the chat. But tax fiscalization is a huge issue, Susan. I think as we think about how we fight corruption and how data can be useful in fighting corruption, we realize that taxes are a crucial part of the public financial management ecosystem. And that open government, when it comes to public financial management, can't limit itself to spending. It also has to include revenue generation. And two of the main sources of revenue generation are, of course, taxes and revenues from industry or from things like extractive exploration. And those have to be, and in many countries, and Colombia is a good example of where this has happened, those have to be a key part of how you gather data. And so certainly moving to more digitized mechanisms for reporting of taxes is a step that we see quite positively. And there's schemas that other countries have used, data schemas that other countries have used that you may want to look at as to how that can be done. But it is something for which definitely a lot of work internationally has already happened, and an area where more work can and should be done. But I think there's also a question that Susan was asking about: do we provide technical support to set up civil society coalitions that will be able to do that? We do, and there's other actors that do as well. I know Mike and the OAS are very well connected with the whole range of actors that support civil society to be able to operate in a coordinated manner to advance open government reforms. It is one thing that people often forget about open government, and that it is worth noting, is that like everything in politics and everything in governance, power is a very key factor. We can't forget that power is a part of the equation. And sometimes it's very daunting for civil society if there's alone and if they don't have support from other civil society organizations in their country, but also through international networks where knowledge and best practices are being driven to really push government, which is far more powerful in many situations and has many more resources to do things that it doesn't want to do, or to push it to do things that it maybe wants to do, but it doesn't realize it should do yet. And I think being able to create coalitions, and Nicolas can speak a bit to this because he's done this in Colombia, but being able to create coalitions of actors makes it so that the open government efforts are protected, that they can go further, and that they're sustained over time. And so we certainly are keen on supporting those kinds of efforts, and I know other funders and other technical experts are keen on that as well. But I'll pause there because I know there's more questions on that, and Nicolas may also want to complement on this.
Yeah, one part, and thank you, Susan, for clarifying a little bit more. Here we can do our tax report online, and the tax authorities have improved a lot on how to use taxes for to find out anomalies. However, some of these things that the tax authorities have done, let's say they have something that's called UIAP, that's the Unidad de Información y Análisis Financiero, that is the one that checks out if the tax information correlates with the situation of the person. And there is some of this information that would be very, very valuable to do independent reporting and independent review from civil society. For the moment, the little thing that we have been able to do is, for example, and some of the things that are open for citizens to access is there is a system, it's called SysBen, like the system of beneficiaries, which are the people that have social support of social services by the government because they have very little income. And only with this information, the SysBen information, we've been able to track people.
We lost Nicolas.
Report. Oh, hello.
We lost you for the last.
Okay. So then, like, my point is that we are advancing, but then we still have a lot to do. And with just little things that are being open, like the information from the people that to know if someone receives support from the government, this has been useful. Like a couple of examples have been useful on the last month. For example, on people that do big imports to the country, I mean imports that are $1 million imports, and the persons that do these imports are registered as beneficiaries of the social services, then it's something that, of course, smells fishy, and then government uses this to track if there are anomalies. Or some of the funders of political candidates. We found thousands and thousands of funders of people that can give 10, 20, $30,000 to a political campaign, and they are reported as if they are on welfare from government. And this is only possible to do because now this little information is available. If more information about the tax about tax information would be
We lost you again there, Nicolas.
very interesting. Okay, I don't know what.
Well, thank you for that, Nicolas and Felipe, and both of your questions really follow up on a question that Marvin had in terms of streamlining connectivity and the proper channels for that. So thank you, gentlemen. I want to turn the microphone over to Mike. I know he's been waiting to ask a question and share with the participants. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Henry. I want to just make an exercise here, wrap up some of the comments, questions on the chat, and then translate a question to the two speakers. And I've noted the recent comment of Marvin about the adoption of the anti-corruption international mechanisms, the UN and also the Americas anti-corruption conventions, and just Felipe responded that there is definitely a platform to build on. That's just one of the examples of what's happening in Belize. And it gave us ground to continue working in this project. So I think that has to be highlighted, and that is very, very important. So Belize, it's moving forward on that front, and it's moving forward with this open government front, and this project is willing in trying to support that process. One of the important things in the very beginning of the inception of open government in the countries is to actually identify the ecosystem well, to make sure that the different stakeholders there are well engaged, know well what this is all about, and have, of course, tools and means to undertake open government, open data. Somebody said it well there, we need to involve the public, private, and non-profit. Yes, and so that is very important. That's been the case in many other countries. This project is oriented to support that. In part of these sessions and the trainings, it's just because we want to make sure that we can start building and strengthen that ecosystem in Belize. So here it's to a reflection and a question, a comment sent in the very beginning, I think was Marvin as well, when he said, I'm willing to, or I want to engage with other partners and embrace this. And so that is very basic, and that is very important also when strengthening an ecosystem. That's part of what we're trying to do. So my question here for Nicolas and Felipe is just kind of like bringing us a step back. We talk highly about budget, taxes, and other projects and initiatives around this. We've seen it work. We see it working now, and it's nice to see it. But how do they start it, and how civil society, supported this process in the very beginning, and how in the process that these initiatives can be made sustainable. So that is something that I want to ask you. What has been the experience in Colombia with Somos Mas in the very beginning? How this started back in 2011, and how easy it was for Somos Mas to start working as a civil society organization with others, partnering with other civil society organizations in the process. Let's see if we can kind of translate that to a Belize reality, and that's very important. And from Felipe's view, of course, in how have seen that evolution, is that evolving in the different countries that have implemented successfully open government, in the role of civil society has been highlighted definitely by both of you. It is definitely an engine behind this. It is an engine behind government when there is a government transition as well, because civil society continues to work on, and there is international commitments by the governments to the Open Government Partnership, for example, on the action plans. How has how we can translate in practical terms the value of engaging civil society in every step from the very beginning. So maybe Nicolas can start by that.
Great. Yeah, and I'll start by connecting also with something that Felipe was talking about, and the importance of coalitions of civil society. We've started from civil society working on this since 2000, well, like formally since 2011, and in all this time we've had a change of government, and we had countless changes in the different government agencies we've been working with. And if it weren't for civil society, many of these experiences wouldn't sustain themselves, because then in government, like with political cycles and changes, things change a lot. And civil society are the ones that have both the role and the possibility to keep the energy and keep the pressure and to keep like some coherence of how to connect throughout time. This on one hand. Of course, in this journey, we've had a lot of setbacks, and people that we were working a lot, let's say, the Ministry of ICTs or others that we were working very closely and fruitfully, and then there is a change, and then there is a step back, and then we have to reroute our efforts. But in any case, be it then a local government or national government gives the step back, there is always points of light where you can connect, and there is always something to do. So there is always reformers within the government, even if you ideologically don't recognize yourself with this, or let's say the government is found with a lot of rampant corruption. There are great civil servants in any country. There are great civil servants. We know that people don't trust civil servants, but most of them, even in many difficult situations, they do have a desire on provide a good public service. And this is the people that we should give support to, even if there are some setbacks in the context or in
Okay, perfect. I see a question here by Lee, and this was initially addressed to Felipe, but maybe Nicolas, if you'd be kind to make an attempt to address it. And Lee was asking, in terms of the platforms are promoted to the layman public, who are not always entirely tech savvy. What would you suggest? Or it goes on to say, I imagine they're user friendly, but what are the platforms promoted so people both know about them and can start using them? I believe these are some of the platforms that Felipe was showing us earlier. But also we do have examples there in Colombia. So if you could share an answer to that, a response to that, Nicolas, thank you.
Yeah, and it's also a great question, because one of the big problems in open government and open data is that many times even well-minded reformers start thinking first about the technology and later about the process behind, and it has led us to a lot of resources that have been badly spent. I think a great example would be the Brazilian example that Felipe showed. That it starts by a citizen mobilization, and then it gets into something that gets that can have a technological component. It could or couldn't, and we have a lot of examples here as well, like positive examples of Colombia on how things start by a political or social mobilization, and they start face to face. And then they transcend, and then they get shown in something that is virtual. Let's say on one of the things that I was showing was a map of, well, I didn't talk about it, but a map of citizen movements, and that, well, of course, started on things that are face-to-face and then transcended into something technological that could help them all. And I would say that this is the correct way of working, starting by something that goes more face-to-face, and then thinking about the technology and not the other way around. Here in Colombia, we have spent a lot of money, or the government has spent a lot of money starting first thinking about, let's say, open data or information systems. And first they do the big investment and then they ask themselves, well, people are not using it. Well, of course they're not using it if it doesn't ground in something like in something that is useful on the first place. The couple of the great example for me is that goes differently, and in other cases is in the health sector. They started by thinking about what are the problems that we have in the health sector? What do the different interest groups think about it? What can we do, and what are the power relations? Because then most of the most interesting information is there are interests that it doesn't get shown because then it goes through some power interest, and the only way that you can do that is if you start working with citizens more like
Thank you, Nicolas. I think we got Felipe back. He needs to go as he has another meeting, but if he can just give us the last sentence in response and
Thank you, Mike, and thank you all. Sorry that I have to dash, but I hope this was useful in some way. I'm trying to do, again, the best that I can to keep answering questions in the chat, even as I head out. But if there's other questions through Mike and Henry, happy to continue to answer those. Like I said, my Twitter ID is my first name and my last name, so Felipe Estefan, and feel free to DM me, add me, ask me more questions. I'm happy to continue answering them through there. I know there's been a question about the role of journalists, and I know Mike can allude to this, but I know there's going to be one of these sessions that is going to be devoted specifically to open data and journalism and data journalism. And so I'll leave that to be taken care of in more detail in that session. I know there are some questions. Lauren, you and others were asking some questions around privacy and considerations surrounding privacy. I just want to clarify, because I was trying to do so over the chat, but it might be easier to do it this way, that the open government movement and that the open data movement are in no way conversely positioned against citizens' rights or the right to privacy or digital rights. Actually, they are very much one same movement, and we are increasingly seeing that the push for more transparency is something that people that come from sort of that digital rights space and people that come from the open government and open data space shared with each other. The same is true for open data. I was just about to type in the chat, following up on my comments, that the open data movement is not advocating for information that shouldn't be published to be published. For example, I'm an open data advocate, but I don't want my medical record to be published. I do want to know how much money is spent in hospitals in the town where I live. So there are different types of information, and there's information that should never be published. I was saying to you in the chat, trade secrets, national security information gives you some examples of that. But I would always question what is the reasoning behind someone telling you that information shouldn't be published just because you haven't seen it. Because sometimes people who don't want transparency and who want to continue promoting obscurity try to use excuses, some of which could be legitimate in some cases, but which could totally not be legitimate in other cases, to protect the publication of relevant information that citizens deserve to have. And so I would focus on that. And finally, I just wanted to make a comment on the question around engaging citizens and what happens with platforms that no one really knows about, that Lee had asked previously. And I was saying before in the chat that that question is really critical, because I think one mistake that we've often made in the open government movement historically, and that we've learned about a lot, is that you could have the most beautiful platform with the most wonderful user experience that has as much information as you think citizens find relevant. But if there is not a proper launch, rollout, socialization, and communication strategy attached to the release of that information and to the launch of those platforms, they won't be used as widely as they should be and as they could be. And so every time that you implement an open government reform, I hope that I could leave you with the sense that it is a little bit like selling a product. You can't just create a product and think that people will want it. You have to do market research and talk to people and engage audiences and see who are the citizens that you would want to connect with this information, and ask them what information they really need. And when you have those insights, then go ahead and design a platform that will address those needs. But don't create things just because you think people want them without having asked them whether they do. And when you do create them and launch them, make sure that they know that they exist, not only that they're well designed. So with those comments in mind, I hope that is helpful and that addresses most of your questions. And I hope that this was useful, and I'll pass it back on to you, Mike, as you continue on this conversation.
Thank you very much, Felipe, for the insight, the questions. Your contact information has been shared on the chat. We hope to see you again visiting this project, not only online but on site. So hopefully we can get you to Belize at some point within the next activities. Thank you very much for the participants who were asking about how this project can contribute or help. How some of the examples could be translated into the Belize case in the scenario, and I'll let Henry to continue the Q&A. This project is not only, of course, about exchanging knowledge or online sessions. We'll have activities and products that we need to implement and develop. One of them is actually a program to incubate projects, open government projects in Belize. So information on that is going to be shared, that perhaps that could be an avenue for organizations like you to participate and develop and implement projects for tax, budget, or could be for tourism, agriculture, could be for something else, a specific tool, a specific app. So we're going to open that process later on in the project. This is just the first stages of knowledge exchange, but just keep tuned to the project, and that's very important. We want to strengthen the ecosystem, government ecosystem, and civil society ecosystem. For those of you who were asking about the different institutions from the government side participating on the project and so on and so forth. We had these very same sessions that we're having with you today and that we started today with civil society, with government. We already have those ones with them. CETA was definitely one of the institutions participating. It's our counterpart, definitely institution in this project, but they were a series of other public institutions participated in that process. So that will be what we call the open government ecosystem. This year will be the civil society open government ecosystem. We want to bring those two together precisely for the creation of those projects, proposals, and projects implemented and so on, and continue moving forward then. So stay tuned on that regard. I leave it there so that you're aware of that, but I know there's more to say, although our time has run out 11 minutes ago. I'm sure Nicolas also has another commitments. I'm going to let him tell us if that is so, as to if we can continue responding to any other questions, or if we just move.
Yeah, I'm a little bit short on time. Yeah, and I would like also, as Felipe, to thank you very much for this, and thank you, Mike, Henry, and everyone watching. And I hope that you continue this path, and I'm sure that you have a lot also to give back and to innovate around how to be more open and participative. So it's been a pleasure to share with you, and hope to see you again here.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. Thank you so much. I know I speak on behalf of all the participants who've joined us online and those of us here at UB for to thank all the participants. Thank you, Mike. Thank you to our presenters today. It was a very, very informative session. And I want to share within the chat box my contact information and also to provide a link to our Facebook page. So please feel free, all participants, to go and join and like our Facebook page. Follow us there. We're going to be sharing all the information from today's session via email. And also we're going to be sharing updates as to the upcoming sessions for next week as well. So please connect with us on Facebook. If there are any questions that you'd want for our presenters today to answer, perhaps later throughout the day, throughout the week, you come up with another question, please feel free to email me, hwade@oas.org, and we can then forward that to our presenters here. Any questions, concerns, let me know. I share my information in the chat room. And again, Mike, we just want to say thank you from Belize. It was a wonderful, wonderful session today, and we're looking forward to next week's session.
Thank you, Henry. Thank you to the University of Belize, of course, for making available the campus there. Next week, and for the next 3 weeks, at this very same time, 10 a.m. Belize time, we're going to be connecting for 3 other seminars of this in the next week, 10 a.m. next Wednesday. So stay tuned on that. We're going to talk about support mechanisms. It's going to be very important for those who want to work on this because there are support mechanisms out there, and what this project want to do is actually bring those mechanisms to Belize and to engage them in the process. So there are support mechanisms for civil society organization, and then we're going to talk about practical cases in more detail of open data and how to do open government. That's going to be very important for those who start thinking about what projects could be implemented within the framework of this project. And then the following week after that, we're going to talk about open data journalism. So stay tuned on that for the next 3 Wednesdays at 10 a.m. We have a meeting. We'll be in this platform. We'll be here with other speakers, of course. So please attend, come, and share. You are the civil society open data ecosystem of Belize. Lastly, please do share the information about this session so more people can learn about open government. Your communities, other organizations, please do so. We need to replicate this. The success of the open government ecosystem in Belize will be because you share with other partners the information, and the same as the video presentations and chat transcript that will be shared with you after this presentation. Revisit those and share it widely and stay connected. Thank you all for connecting. Thank you very much again to the University of Belize. We'll see you next time here. Again, me from Washington and then the speaker.